We are now being live streamed. And what's more, we are also being recorded. Well, Paul, sounds like you've had a busy day on the 22nd of January.
Yes.
What's up?
Yes, I have. It's quite cold, bitterly cold in the southern Ontario area. So I and a couple of my colleagues went to a big protest rally in downtown Toronto. It's part of what's called Worldwide Freedom Day, and they have these about every 6 weeks. These are big protests in major Canadian cities and in Europe. It's all about the lockdowns, the forced vaccination, the vaccine passports, forced masking, and all the other attacks on our civil liberties. So the one in Toronto, I'm bad on estimates, but about 5,000 people, I would say, and they came out to hear several people, including Maxime Bernier, who is the leader of the People's Party of Canada, which is a populist party, which he founded 3 years ago. It did quite well in the recent federal elections. It didn't elect anybody, but it got 5% of the vote. He gave a rousing talk, and then they went out on a march. My colleagues and I went elsewhere, and then we rejoined Maxime Bernier for a rally in Port Credit, Ontario, which is the suburb just west of Toronto. And that was really spirited. About I'd say about 300 or 400 people, and he spoke. An independent member of the provincial parliament, Randy Hillier, spoke, and they really nailed it. That this is these protests are all about freedom. That in the name of fighting COVID, the medical, what I call the medical Stalinist governments that we have just absolutely vacuumed away our liberties. For a considerable period of time, you couldn't go to church in many Canadian provinces. Meetings closed. I've had to point out to people, I've been to communist Cuba, and I'm no fan of that regime, believe me. Seeing the Castro nearly kill my parents back in the Bogota Revolution in 1948. But in communist Cuba, I could go to church. In communist Cuba, I could sit down and have a meal in a restaurant, and nobody came up and asked me for my passport or vaccine passport. I'm not saying Cuba is a model; it's not. But just to show how low we have sunk, and how many people are just prepared to put up with this tyranny. They have been scared absolutely out of their mind, witless. It's been a form of mental abuse, and I hate saying people are crazy, but I think a substantial number, at least of my fellow Canadians, are mentally ill. They've been terrified to the same way that a prisoner who's being tortured can be abused, and in the end will say anything. They'll confess to having killed Kennedy or done 9/11 or destroyed the Hindenburg. They're just anything to make the pain stop. These people, so many have been terrified by the relentless barrage of garbage on the mass media. Just fear after fear after fear. Anyway, these rallies were really good, really spirited, and everybody got cold toes because it's quite cold. But it is so nice to be in a crowd of 5,000 people, and I didn't see a single mask except a couple of people who were wearing those the mask, the Riddler or something from some movie. It's a spoof, but they weren't wearing it because they were afraid of the COVID. It's really nice being with freedom fighters. It's great for the spirit.
Riddler is a Batman character, so that's
right. I think it was there. Anyway.
First off, the basic questions. How cold was it?
Well, let me think. It was -5 in the foreign system, so that's centigrade. 12 24 maybe Fahrenheit.
Okay, that's not life threatening.
Oh no! This is not Siberia. No. But yeah, it was cold. It was raw, and but we had our our love to keep us warm.
I don't know if I ever told you about the time, God, 24, 25 years ago when I was offered a job, in many ways a dream job for me, teaching archaeology at the University of Calgary.
Of where? Where?
At the University of Calgary.
Oh, Calgary.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
With one of the pioneers of, basically, I guess, actually to replace one of the pioneers of decipherment of Maya hieroglyphics, David Humiston Kelly, also a Harvard man, and work side by side with a fellow student of mine from Harvard, Peter Matthews. It would have been an absolutely wonderful job, but I kind of freaked out. I'm a Southern boy. I lived in Massachusetts and Chicago, but when I got to Calgary, there were some things that just kind of blew my mind. One of them was that I had never seen parking places that had to be electrified. That was brand new to me. I mean, even in Chicago, never seen that.
Well, for somebody who's has not grown up in Minnesota, Alaska, or Western Canada or Northern Ontario, I have to explain to people what these are. It's an electrical belt that goes around your battery, and you plug it into an outside outlet while you're parked overnight, and it keeps the battery warm, because in really cold weather the batteries can run down and your vehicle won't start. So that was the thing that freaked you out. You couldn't believe you'd have to warm your battery.
Well, that was just one of the things. The other of the things was, I looked out to the west and saw the beautiful Canadian Rockies, Banff and Lake Louise, which my grandparents had always talked about visiting there and how it was one of the most gorgeous places in the world. And indeed it is. But I made a comment, wow, look at the snow. And they said, well, I hope you like snow, because we have snow every month of the year. It can even snow in July. It can snow on July the 4th, on Bastille Day, the 14th of July, and any time in August. And I'm like, okay, that's really interesting, because it doesn't even do that regularly in southern Alaska. I'd been to southern Alaska. But anyhow, and then I think the final thing was, I was talking about, well, how big a hassle would it be to bring a dog or pet up here? And they said, well, it's really not. But if you've got an animal that's used to the cold, used to the warm weather, there's a problem here. I mean, an animal basically can freeze to death going to the bathroom.
I think some mischief maker was laying it on a bit thick. It's true, they can have snow any month of the year. In fact, though, it's very, very rare they would have snow from May to the end of September. But what happens is there's a wind that comes up over the Rockies. It's called a Chinook, and it can drop the temperature 40 degrees in 12 hours, or raise it. I was in Calgary a good many years ago in July, and it did snow, a few snowflakes, but you don't have to exist with snow 12 months of the year. On the other hand, I've been in Calgary in February, and suddenly it goes up to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind comes up over the Rockies, warms the place like mad, and for a couple of days it's balmy weather, and then back to winter. But I know what you mean. It would be a real state of acclimatization. But
Well,
who knows what would have happened if you'd taken that route?
well, it's interesting. I tried to negotiate it. Basically, the department wanted me, and I would have really enjoyed working with that department. And so I tried to negotiate with the dean, and I said, here's the thing. Most positions in archaeology, if you really want to be serious about doing research, we have to work in the dry season. And the dry season basically is your winter. So can I teach? Can I teach summers and falls, and then have set up basically a field school in Mexico or Colombia during the winter, and he determined I was incompatible at that point.
What
He
sort of archaeology were you doing in Colombia?
Pre-Columbian and also historic.
But then, what were you digging in Colombia?
San Agustin, Muisca. You said you're from Colombia?
Well, I was born there. My parents were both Canadians, and my dad was in the oil business. So I'm technically a Canadian born abroad, not an immigrant, not a foreigner. But my memory of Colombia is very, very small. I left there when I was about 1.5. Then we went to Venezuela for 2 years. So I
Around Maracaibo?
in Venezuela, yes, a terrible place.
Maracaibo, where the big oil fields are.
That's right, and it's basically a coastal swamp, so
Yeah.
it's really, really humid and hot all the time. My parents didn't enjoy it very much either.
You've never been back to Colombia?
No, I haven't.
It is a stunningly beautiful country, and
I'm told that by several Canadian expats who've been. One has spent a lot of time in Medellin, and of course, the standard joke for anybody that knows a bit of the news will say, "Oh, the cocaine capital of the world." Well, that might have been true 20 years ago, but time has moved on. But I was told it's a extremely civilized city with a good climate, friendly people. At least the guy I know spoke highly of it.
it's absolutely true. And I actually know some people who are moving down there right now, and I totally recommend it. It's an absolutely gorgeous country, and I mean for single men, it's also a kind of a paradise because the Colombian women are very beautiful, and most of them, most of them are in fact white.
That's what my friend said, by the way, that it was the happy hunting ground, and they've not really been corrupted by Jewish man-hating feminism. And most don't see themselves as the perpetual abused underclass that they've learned in the poisonous feminist studies that overload so many universities.
Well, that's sort of an interesting lead into what I wanted us to talk about today. But your protest does sound positive, and do you ever listen to The Amazing Polly? You know who I'm talking
Yeah,
about? Podcast.
yeah, but she's quite good. She's done some wacko things that are really just inspired. We have in Ontario most liquor and wine is marketed through a government near monopoly. I mean, I don't want to go into the exceptions, but essentially, you go and buy your booze in Ontario at the Liquor Control Board. Okay, and the stores are big and they're quite spacious, and the selection is really fairly good. So what she did, she took a brown paper bag. They used to give you these great plastic bags, but we're saving the environment, so they give you a brown bag. So and it has the logo on the front of the brown paper bag. So what she did, she took one of these bags and cut out space for her eyes, her nose, and her mouth. And she walked into stores that way in the early days of, you've got to wear a mask. And I mean, they didn't know how to take her. And in one place, I think, threw her out because it wasn't a proper mask. In another case, she said, I'm wearing a mask. Yeah, she's got a great sense of humor. Boy, we need that.
But one of the things that that you reminded me of, one of her shows from, I believe it was probably July of 2020. You were talking about the sort of the tortuous nature of the COVID prohibitions, and she actually did a special. I don't know if you saw it or not, on comparing the COVID lockdown, analyzing it in terms of the United Nations definition of torture. And she was very serious about it. That wasn't a laughing matter at all. And I mean, I thought she made a rather compelling case that you could analyze the COVID lockdown as a species of torture, an abuse within the definition of torture. And
I didn't see that particular program, but I do know that argument in general, and it's pretty powerful. It just shows how damaged people's thinking has become. When it's explained to you, you want to say, well, duh, I didn't realize that, but you're right. But why haven't a lot of people realized it? We like to think of ourselves as fairly sophisticated, more educated than our grandparents, or more educated than people in the 19th century, and so on. We may have put in more years of schooling, but many people are, I'm afraid, are incapable of thinking. It may seem pretty harsh, but that's my conclusion.
Well, I think there are a lot of reasons for that, and maybe what I wanted to talk about today was
Sure.
is part of the reason. But I want to recommend to anybody that you watch the amazing Polly, Is It Torture video from July, I believe it's July of 2020, maybe it was August of 2020, but also Bernadette Sellers just today, or maybe I just saw it today, but it's very recent, did a piece on why we love our prisoners. And that basically she was commenting on the fact that a lot of people don't even want the lockdown to end, and they're afraid of it ending. I know such a person here in New Orleans. I've mentioned her several times. She's still a friend, but our friendship has become very strained by COVID, because she's basically a believer. I mean, and she almost makes the sign of the cross every time she sees me, that I'm not vaccinated and I don't take any of this very seriously. And this is I was one of the first people anyone knew in New Orleans, at least, who had COVID. I came down with it very early. I was diagnosed with it anyhow. I had some sort of a respiratory ailment, and I got over it after a week of hydroxychloroquine. And of course, that makes me extremely suspicious to the left, because the devil personified. Donald Trump had recommended hydroxychloroquine, and I asked my doctor, well, hey, can I try this? And he said, oh, sure, and gave it to me. And anyhow, I mean, I have a very unusual doctor who was educated in Franco, Spain, so I'm kind of privileged that way. But
you mentioned the strained friendship, and I think of some of my rather eclectic group of friends. So one who is an absolutely confirmed atheist, but that doesn't get in the way of our friendship. We've been friends for at least 30 years. I know others who've taken up strange diets that they become vegans, and I believe that's a a quick way to starvation, but okay. Um, uh, but strongly held religious or non-religious beliefs doesn't seem to interfere, at least in my circle of friends, with friendship. But vaccine status has torn families apart. I know of several where um, senior members of of the family were not invited by their own children to Christmas events because they're not vaccinated. I mean, they talk about hostility. Even if grandpa was a notorious drunk, you'd still, well, kind of invite him because he's grandpa. But no, he's not vaxxed. Didn't matter. This has been absolutely poisonous for human relationships up here. And you're, it says, maybe a little lucky that it hasn't ended your friendship with that woman.
Well, we have some major interests in common and some projects that we're working on together. And I just, I mean, the funny thing is, she is basically one of the last people I would have thought ever would fall for this, because what we work on together is we work on the corruption of the local courts together. And so it's not like she's a conformist or that she believes the lies about anything else.
It's not funny. There's some people who are in other other ways skeptical that they're nobody's fool and all that. They've taken this this thing like a bass grabbing at a lure. They've swallowed it all the way down to their tail.
Well, the interesting, I guess the interesting thing, and this is sort of where we get into the concept of movies and media. I think it's because of basically television and the overwhelming media message, which really, as far as consistency, I think there's nothing approaching the consistency of the message here at all. I mean, the dissenters are all shoved off to the side, and even Donald Trump. I mean, even DeSantis in Florida, who is permitted a lot of freedom in Florida, he basically says that he thinks people should get it. So I mean, that qualifies him as a moderate. He's not in any sense against it. And Trump, of course, has pushed it very hard. And so, right or left, at least mainstream right or left, everybody is saying you ought to do it. Well, it really comes down to, do you have a freedom to say no or not? That's the dividing line.
Well, that I can respect people's opinion on that. You ought to do it. That's an opinion. We're certainly, the freedom fighters up here draw the line is compelling us to do it. That you can't, you're fired from certain jobs if you don't. You can't fly on an airplane if you're not. You can't ride on a train if you're not. In Ontario, you have to have a vax passport to go into a restaurant, other than to get takeout. Well, you can't go into a restaurant right now because we're on another lockdown. But it's the compulsion. I don't have a problem in general with vaccinations, particularly, but these various COVID ones, I have serious doubts. They haven't been around very long. Do we really know, or I should say, do they really know the long-term effects? Well, they can't, because there's been no long-term. We also find out that they're not very effective. And if they're effective, why do we keep having to have boosters? And we know they're not effective because over 50% of the people in hospitals, certainly in Ontario, with COVID are fully vaccinated. Well, I thought that the vax was supposed to prevent you from getting COVID. The fallback position is, well, it won't be so severe. Well, I don't know. I mean, if you have to be in hospital, it's relatively severe.
So is it because we are programmed by media have the past 80 years first of, or past 100 years first of radio, and then of movies and television. Are we Pavlov's dogs?
Well, sometimes wonder, Charles, because I think people are sort of schizophrenic. If you said, well, is what you see on TV, a detective movie, detective show, is that the real world? And they would say, well, part of them says, no, it's just actors acting out a script. But part of them sees that as the real world. And that's why I'm very concerned about advertising and a lot of the content of popular entertainment, because I think many people really think that the real world is what they see up on the boob tube, and their life is somehow maybe not quite real. Whereas unfortunately, what they see on the television, for the most part, is completely make believe.
I've never heard anybody say it that way. I don't think that reality is upside down. That's an interesting possibility, that we have come to think that our lives are the fictions.
Yeah, and somehow, well, my life doesn't quite live up to the real world, which is up there on TV. I mean, I see these appalling ads. One of them is, let me think, it's for some medical plan. And there's the ideal family. He's a gangly Negro. She is quite a good-looking white woman, and they've got their little child with a junior afro or whatever. And they're discussing the ins and outs of this healthcare program. That's presented as the normal. Whereas you and I know it's the aberration. But people are being acclimatized not to see that as rather dysfunctional and probably a bad choice on the part of the white woman, but rather the perfectly acceptable new normal. Or one of my banks up here shows I don't know, various couples making some sort of financial decision, and there's two men. Again, in this case, kind of a slim Negro and a really effeminate-looking man with their arms around each other, and they're making some sort of financial decision. So they're a couple too. Well, isn't it just dilly? But for those of us who had the good fortune to be born before much of this nonsense, I fear that people maybe in their teens and 20s might actually think, well, that's the normal world. No, that's still an aberration.
So are we basically, is our society becoming like the people in New Jersey who listened to War of the Worlds in the 1930s and actually thought the Martians were there?
Yeah, I was thinking about that when you were speaking earlier. I think that's a good example. In those days, radio, because it was new, seemed to have immense credibility. So when you had this staccato, or no, it was Orson Welles, wasn't it, who did the narrative? Okay, when he's talking about this ongoing apparent drama of the advance of these creatures, apparently there were people wasn't there somebody who took it so seriously he committed suicide?
I don't know the statistics, but I've heard that. And I mean, the really amazing thing is that people were calling. What's certain is that people were calling the police departments and the fire departments and the National Guard and even the White House panicked about the Martian invasion, even though there were commercial breaks. There were commercial breaks, as usual, in the show, and it apparently didn't faze anybody that there would be commercial breaks in the middle of a national emergency and an invasion from outer space.
You just want to reach into your closet there and get one of those signs with a string on it. I'm stupid, and give them their stupid sign. But the what uh, bad as that was, I think with the added power of television and television ads, you not only hear it, which you did on the radio, but you see it. And I know many people say, well, it must be true. I saw it on the TV news. Well, part of that's true. You saw it on the TV news, but whether what you saw was true or not, uh, I mean, it's very, very easy, to edit things, to edit the storyline, to what you leave out is often as more as important as what you put in. Um, and yet that has a credibility even for people who, on one level, know it's all a creation.
Yeah, I mean, and this is just, I mean, I raised the question of basically Pavlov's dogs again. I mean, we get so used to seeing things in the movies and on TV, and has has that has that altered our psychological makeup? Do you think? I mean, I think that the phrase I put for the title tonight was movies. Are they a mirror, or are they the guiding light? And I was trying to think of what kind of guiding light. I mean, are they like a lighthouse that shows us a way? Is that how everybody thinks it? Or are they like a will o' the wisp that leads people deeper and deeper into the swamps here, into the mouths of hungry alligators? And
Well, I think movies, just like the misnamed television news, are really morality plays. And it's a very twisted form of morality that they're teaching. For instance, in television news, they approve of the person if he's described as a moderate, as opposed to President Trump, who is well, he's Trump, he's an extremist or whatever, but moderate good, conservative bad, or even worse, if you have dissenting views on race, well, of course, you're a white supremacist. Uh, uh, so they don't present you with the news. Donald Trump claimed such and such at his rally recently. Now, the CNN will immediately tell you Trump lied again when he claimed whatever it was at his rally. This is
so the mantra is he repeated his false allegations
yeah,
of election fraud. I mean,
yes.
that's false allegations of election fraud is a phrase that you have to repeat over and over and over again. You can't talk about election fraud. It is only false claims or false allegations of election fraud. That has to be one run on or compound, basically compound word.
And that's why I say that the at least the news media are largely a morality play, where you've got good like a moral or a soap opera. I studied soap operas at great length about 15 years ago, and I'd even followed some of them. I'll admit. And the genius of the writing is that you could have been away for months, and very quickly you pick up the thread. Or you may never have watched it before, but after the first hour or your first show, you can easily sort things out because people are very readily identified. He's a good guy. He's a bad guy. She's a good girl. She's a bad girl. Now, occasionally they may develop and become a good after being bad, but generally it's very clear: good guys, bad guys. Well, and so it's easy to follow. Um, and the news is the same way. That causes are labeled, and to clue you in. These are bad guys, so don't pay attention to what they say. These are good people. You can go with them. Biden good, Trump bad. Um, People concerned about immigration, racists. People who want to let all the dusky bum and beggar nations of the world into the United States. Good, they're moral. What is immoral about helping your nation commit suicide? I don't know. But people imbibe the news and often internalize the message. I had a an example of that in my own life. Um, Under pressure from several Jewish lobby groups, my board of education, when I was an English instructor, was pressured for 6 years to get rid of me. And finally, after 6 years, uh, they ended a 25-year career I had teaching. Um, and all along the way, there would be the issue would heat up. There'd be um, there'd be a lot of drama, and then maybe there'd be a temporary resolution. Or at one point, I got moved into adult education, but then things are quiet for a few months, and it heats up again. So I got a fair deal of publicity in the print media and TV and in radio over a 6-year period. And I thought, well, I used to more or less go along with the idea. I don't care what you write about me, just spell the name right. Um, I no longer, and I know colleagues who truly believe that to this day. My own experience didn't back that up. Um, During the entire period, I received 4 phone calls from strangers. 2 were supportive, but they never associated with me. They never came out. They never did anything. So okay, somebody was supportive enough to call, but they didn't join the movement or do anything, as far as I could tell. And 2 were hostile. The usual F this and F that. But and I thought. So from all that publicity, if the idea was it doesn't matter what they say about you as long as they spell your name right, that brought us no recruits. Now I differentiate between those people who I would consider strangers and my many good supporters within the movement. That was different. They hung with me, and they did all sorts of good things to help me out. But in terms of a recruiting uh, measure or a recruiting instrument, it was a complete dud. And I think I know the reason. Um, you the lesson people were getting, it was this: look, he took these controversial stands, critical of immigration. Some people say he's a racist, or supporting free speech. He supported this guy Ernst Zundel, who questioned the Holocaust. Uh, uh, um, uh, and look what's happening to him. So if I have any dissident thoughts, like he does, I don't want to be like that guy. They're trying to take away his job, and in the end, they did. So far from recruiting people, it confirms them in their opinion that they should basically sit this one out. It's too risky. That was my experience.
You said that you studied with Marshall McLuhan.
Yes.
Now, how has that shaped your has that shaped your life?
No. In retrospect, I learned a lot from him, but not from his teaching. He was very eccentric. He was teaching us modern poetry. He had some interesting insights, but I never took one of his communication courses. I subsequently, after graduating, read a couple of his books on communication theory, and I think he has some very interesting ideas. Like he's famous for the saying, "The medium is the message."
Very fair.
I would I would translate that a little differently. The medium shapes the message. Thus, the medium, let's say, is smoke signals. Well, you can't write a novel and communicate by smoke signals. You burn down the whole forest to send out chapter one. So, in that sense, the medium shapes the message. And I think that in many ways is true. Like Nixon found out because he had bad advisors when he was in the first TV debates with Kennedy. How the medium, it's not just the words you say, good as they might be, but how you look. He looked sweaty, uh, uh, with a day's growth of beard. He looked not very well prepared, a little shifty. Whereas Kennedy looked cool and calm and collected. The medium might have been, or if the medium had only been a radio debate, things might have been different. Kennedy might. Kennedy's broad Massachusetts accent could be rather grating if all you could do is hear. But seeing, he looked handsome, very neat, very.
Yeah, it was basically a matter of Kennedy agreed to use makeup.
Yeah, and was either bright enough to know the importance or was advised by people who did know the importance of not looking sweaty or, just a little shifty. What was Nixon's nickname at some point? Tricky Dick.
Oh yeah.
So he kind of looked that part. Whether or not it's true, I don't know, but the appearances are very important.
So again, going back to the basic issue of why we have become, I mean, there's so many memes that have come out. One of my favorites was the famous cat dialogue about two ladies and a cat. You know the one I'm talking about?
No, I don't think so.
It was readapted for a whole bunch of things. One extremely angry lady is saying to the cat, and the other one is just silently listening. It's you've got to believe the science, or you don't believe the science, I think is the way it's phrased. And the cat says back, "You believe the television. You've never listened to any science."
There's a lot of wisdom in that little response.
Oh, the cat always has the last word in these memes. I'm surprised you haven't seen that one. Anyhow, it's because it gets constantly readapted for one topic after another. But the repetition of messages and the repetition of frames for messages is something that I think is kind of fascinating. And you were talking about the media being a morality play, and the reason I got kind of exercised, so I don't know if have you ever seen any of these Paul Schrader movies I mentioned? Taxi Driver, Last Temptation of Christ, or the one we had the 40th anniversary of release because it was filmed in New Orleans just the other night. Cat People. Have you ever seen any of those?
I think I've seen all of them. Is the cat People sort of a horror movie, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It is.
Black and white, I think.
Hmm?
Black and white?
No. There was one in 1942 that was black and white, and Bill Johnson was commenting last night. He had seen that one. He had never seen the 1982 version. I've never seen the 1942 version, but the 1982 version was filmed basically my senior year at Tulane, right before I went off to Harvard. Anyhow, it was a big deal. Natasha Kinski was in town. every teenage boy wanted to catch a glimpse of Natasha Kinski.
That's
And
right. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I'm not sure whether I saw that or not. I did see the original black and white one, and I'm just not sure. I remember Natasha Kinski, but yeah, I'd have to say I've seen all three of those movies that you told
right,
me about.
they are anti-morality plays. And I mean, I really wish that I had had more of a chance to talk to Paul Schrader Thursday night, because it was an anti-morality play that was astoundingly politically incorrect by modern standards 40 years later. Basically, women sexually active women turn into murderous felines, basically, and so they have to be bound and caged. How's that for a how's that for a progressive message?
Yeah.
And, and the lineage of, you know, white women who turn into black cats goes all the way back to Africa, where early black humans started caging these kitties. I mean, it's basically kind of an amazing anti-morality movie is all I can say. And of course, filmed in New Orleans. New Orleans is the city of the House of the Rising Sun.
Right.
It's got all these associations with, you know, shady sex life. And that was, I mean, Paul Schrader's, I guess, his 10th or 11th movie. His first one that really made a big splash was Jodie Foster as a 12-year-old prostitute in Taxi Driver.
Right. I remember that. Yeah.
And that, you know, the great social impact of that movie was inspiring John Hinckley to shoot President Reagan in 1981. Hinckley came from a fairly respectable Dallas family. My mother actually knew his mother. It's really weird. And it's fascinating because, I mean, up to a point, the culture of movies and television really has radically shaped and formed our society. And I mean, you look at the past 107 years, I guess, 107 years since Birth of a Nation, 1915. I mean, in Birth of a Nation, a young, beautiful heroine, Lillian Gish, throws herself off a cliff rather than allow herself to be raped by a black man. You know, roughly exactly 19 years later, you've got Claudette Colbert showing her leg to hitchhike while hitchhiking with Clark Gable. It happened one night, but I mean the sexual morality even there at the end of the 20s of Flapper, she's obviously a Flapper image, is such that, you know, there has to be a barrier between her bed and Clark Gable's bed, comparable to the wall in Jericho. And when they finally get married, they have this little ritual where he blows a horn and the wall finally falls down.
Oh.
And I mean, but that was 80 years ago, and 80 to 107 years ago, there was still at least some suggestion of traditional morality in the movie. And then, you know, basically the career of Paul Schrader. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about Sidney Poitier and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. And
Right.
aside from the racial issue, that's a totally straight-laced morality play because, I mean, a couple meet in Hawaii and they get married almost immediately. And the issue is, will the girl's parents accept the guy? And it basically, I mean, it wouldn't have been a terribly controversial movie at all if it had been based on one class, right? I mean, if she was from a rich family and he was from a poor family, but they were both white, it would have been a totally different movie. But basically, there's no lurid sex, and we're talking about, 1966, 66 or 67 here. And then less than 20 years later, we've had the 70s, we've had Nixon, and we've had sort of the perfection of the sexual revolution, and cat people come out. And that's after Taxi Driver. And, I asked the question, and it may be too much to try to answer tonight, but I hope we can pursue it in future events. Is this movie culture reflecting an actual independent transformation in society, or is it shaping the transformation in society? I mean, my argument about Sidney Poitier and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner is that it was a planned tandem, that you had both the legal political choice to fight to abolish the laws against miscegenation, and the movie coming out at the same time. That was a plan. But I'm not sure that the rest of the sexual revolution happens in quite such perfect synchrony. I mean, the Supreme Court decision in Loving versus Virginia and this movie, Guess Who's Coming Together, they were 6 months apart. It's hard to believe that those are independent events. But, the 60s, the Summer of Love, all that. And, by 82, you've got really a kind of grotesque manifestation of the sexual revolution, and and I guess Taxi Driver sort of reflected that too. 8 years before, in '74, a 12-year-old prostitute. This is not an attractive concept. That Jodie Foster. I mean, there was a lot of controversy about the part she played, even though, and the studios had a team of psychiatrists standing by to see if it was going to damage her to play this part, and supposedly it didn't. But did it damage the world? Did it damage the world? Did it transform a whole generation's way of thinking? And I think that's something that, I mean, is that related to Marshall McLuhan at all? Or is that a separate issue?
Well, maybe it's a parallel issue. I think movies are very effective in changing attitudes, just because they have that same credibility. They seem to. You can see it, you can hear it, and there's a tendency to take that in some ways as true rather than just a creation, a fantasy. I don't know so much about Taxi Driver, but I really think the movie Guess Who's Coming to Dinner was hardcore propaganda, showing that this interracial relationship, which would have been illegal up until 6 months before in some states, was good. It was a case of good people overcoming, if not evil, at least the backward values of at least one of the daughter's parents, the woman's parents. showing you that an interracial union was good because they're both good people and professionals and so on. Um, uh, uh, I think it definitely changes attitudes or helps change attitudes, and of course by depicting the those who object to it as well, in this case, small-minded. I mean, they're not backward, you know, hicks or hillbillies, but they I think it's the Spencer Tracy character who
Yeah.
has problems with it. It, it shows the good, in this case, the interracial couple overcoming uh, the bad or the regressive views from another age to lead us into a nice multiracial, I mean, miscegenated future. But what might have been interesting to have done a realistic follow up or sequel to Guess Who's Coming to Dinner 10 years later. He repeatedly beats the ever loving you know what out of her. He's abandoned her, and she's got one mixed race kid. That is often the result of miscegenation between blacks and whites, where the white woman ends up being abused and beaten. I taught a woman like this. And when I was in adult ed, is amazing. I taught mostly women. They tell me everything. Like teenagers tend to, there's a little bit of the power, power um, thing. They kind of want to rebel, or even if it's not rebellion, that they feel either shy or just not comfortable telling you stuff. These women, I some of the like I actually can't say on the show that you say is made for the family, but believe me, I have some humorous stories there. But one woman, this was during the O.J. Simpson, no, the verdict of the O.J. Simpson trial. And the class asked me if they could bring a TV in and watch the verdict. And I said, well, yeah, that'd be okay. I mean, they're all adults. So I said, look, this is what you have to accomplish. We can either do it in class or do it for homework, but sure, we'll turn the TV on. Well, the verdict came down, and I had a few black women in my class. It was a little hard to read them. One seemed happy, the other two kind of poker faced. I had a couple of white men in my class. They were they were angry. I had a couple of black men, and again, I couldn't really read them. Then I had I had a number of white women. Some were disgusted. But these three, they were screaming. I mean, they were 40-year-old women out of their chairs. Oh, Jay, oh, Jay, oh, Jay. I mean, they were just so delighted. And one of them told me her story. She was on her fourth black uh, non-marriage relationship, and she fairly regularly was beaten. She'd come in with a black eye and puffy cheeks, and she just didn't know what she was going to do. And then over the course of several conversations with her, I learned that her three previous black boyfriends had put a beating on her, and she was from all I could tell, she's a nice woman, relatively intelligent, um, uh, you know, reasonably decent looking. And I thought, well, what is this fatal attraction? I mean, it's not that you're getting anything out of it other than a good beating. Um, and I've got to some extent, blame the poisonous propaganda that she would have gotten from the mass media. Even then, we were talking over 20 years ago, and probably from her church if she went to one. We're all God's children. We're all the same. Certainly from the education system. Well, not from me, but the education system celebrates mixed race and teaches books which by now would be very much ancient, but books like Black Like Me by John Howard Griffin, or To Kill a Mockingbird, which is a nice little morality play that but, black's good, some white's bad, and if there's a conflict, a good white guy like Atticus Finch or Gregory Peck comes along and rights the wrong. A completely simplistic thing, but where would she have heard that maybe it's not such a good idea to get together to have sex with a black man for a white woman, unless she got it from her parents or girlfriends. It's something she'd have to either feel instinctively or figure out for herself. But what really blew my mind was it didn't seem to matter. I guess the Bible says, as a dog returns to his vomit, so doth a fool return to his folly. I mean, why would she go back to another guy's going to give her a beating? I could never figure that one out, but I blame to some extent the miseducation of people through the mass media and through movies. That movie with Sidney Poitier and whoever the woman was a powerful lesson. These are two good people. They get together and they overcome the bigotry of at least one of her parents.
This is fascinating. But are you familiar with the writings of Camille Paglia?
Vaguely, yes. And she's done some good stuff.
Some, but I mean, some of the but I don't know if this is good or bad, but she had an explanation in one of her books, and I can't remember which one, maybe more than one. Sexual Persona is 94, I believe, is the one I might be thinking about. But she talks about why it is that women go back to abusive mates, partners, and her explanation is gruesome, but I think it's related up to a point to movies like Cat People and Taxi Driver. That her position, I don't know how well based on interviews it is, and I mean, you obviously didn't interview this woman in your class with this in mind necessarily, but she took the position that violence goes together with good sex. And I think that is a position that the movies have taken and promoted up to a point. Especially, I mean, we're not talking about the top rung of movies when we're talking about Paul Schrader. He, I think, got one Academy Award in his entire career, but certainly not for Cat People. There's this feeling that violence and sexual satisfaction go together, and I mean, in other words, the decay and degeneracy in sexual morality has led to, I think, the decay and degeneracy of basically population genetics and population mixing. And that's, I mean, there's this overwhelming myth somewhere. I don't know where it started or if it's, the people in the pornography industry who started it, that Black men are super studs and that they make better lovers than we do. I feel like Hollywood is at least partially responsible for this, and that this is part of the really sort of sub rosa programming, what Alfred Schaefer used to call, before he was locked up, not brainwashing, but brain contamination, creating myths that push people in a very bad direction. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think you're onto something. These movies were not presenting a slice of life, which might be good or bad, but this is life the way it is. These are constructed. The narrative is constructed with a lesson at the to be taught. And I think the Guess Who's Coming to Dinner has that lesson that uh, among good people, especially if they have good upper middle class jobs, uh, love will prevail. Assuming it is love. Um, uh, I'm not in a huge position to challenge the that myth, and I believe it is largely a myth about the super prowess of the blacks. The several women I've spoken to who have who spoke on the topic who have had sex with blacks um, are well, certainly not unanimous in the belief that they're far better than white men. Um,
We go
but
too
that
much deeper, we'll lose our G rating. If we go too much deeper into this, we'll lose any claim to a G rating.
yes, I guess we better uh, hit the euphemisms, but um, I think from the very beginning, no, well, I shouldn't say that. With the large takeover of most of Hollywood by Jewish interests in beginning in the 20s, there wasn't an effort to shape perception. Not maybe not every movie and etc. But in that book, Hollywoodism, how the Jews took control of Hollywood. It's a bit of a disingenuous book, right? Because it seems to draw the line around 1970, but the book details how between 1920 and let's say about 1970, Jews took a greater and greater role in Hollywood, and some of the type of image they wanted uh, to show to Americans. Um, Initially, according to the book,
I'm sure I'm familiar with this book. Who wrote this?
Hollywoodism, Hollywood ISM, Hollywoodism, how the Jews took control of Hollywood. It's by a Jewish author,
No.
and it's quite boastful. Well, look at how clever these guys were. Several of them came to the United
You're
States.
now being live.
Sorry about that.
Sorry.
That go ahead. I was looking it up. I turned on Google and it turned on the broadcast version of this. Go.
Okay.
We're fine.
Well, it was saying that some of these original producers came, from Eastern Europe. They were Jewish. They didn't even speak the language that well, and they felt a little bit tentative, and so they tried to initially show back a fairly nice sanitized version of life back to Americans. The blonde actress who's a good girl and so on. But after a while, they became more and more interested in movies with a message, some of which were, I would think, subversive. Even relatively appealing movies that I know probably you and I both grew up on around Christmas time. White Christmas. What was the one with Bing Crosby and the Holiday?
Holiday Inn.
Holiday Inn, yeah. Okay, the kind of good feel good movies about how Christmas gets saved and all of that, and introducing us, making Christmas more secular. Not that there was anything. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, Hollywoodism by okay, hang on. It doesn't show his name here, but it's something like a very Jewish name. Uh,
Yeah.
I found his name somewhere. Let's see.
Yeah. I should know it, but it's also a movie. Well, actually, a documentary,
Yeah.
which is quite good. It's well worth watching. Uh, as I said,
Jacobovici.
yeah, and the VICI ending of an Italian name is almost always um, Jewish. You know, I have a background in linguistics. I occasionally can amaze people by guessing their ethnicity from their name. um,
That's that. I've never heard that. That's a typically Jewish ending of an Italian name.
yeah, very very much so.
Fascinating.
The movie, I mean, it's a documentary, but is actually quite good. As I say, um, a little misleading in that at the end you would think, well, Samuel B. Meyer, etc. generation has moved on, they've died or retired, and you're left to believe that, well, that was then, but now is probably different. Well, actually, now is even worse. But what I was saying though about those movies about Christmas that came out in the late '40s, early '50s, they were feel-good movies, and they're okay as far as they went. But what they did was they took Christ out of Christmas. They made Christmas just a secular holiday, with Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and snowmen and Frosty the Snowman and all that. There's nothing wrong with that. But that was stage one in the attack on Christmas. Then stage two, I think, began maybe in the '70s or '80s with the effort to remove Christmas altogether. It's now, happy holidays, or have I think we were talking about that a couple of weeks ago, happy holidays or season's greetings, because Christmas, if you mention Christmas, it's not inclusive. And that is one of the most lying words in our current politically correct lexicon. Inclusive. Inclusive doesn't mean we're all together. It means you and I are excluded. In order to have an inclusive environment, you better shut up if you're a Christian, and don't send a Christmas card to somebody else or wish them Merry Christmas, because they might feel excluded. um, and I see the entertainment industry very, very complicit in helping to shape attitudes. Well, look at how many um, how much entertainment portrays rural Southern folks as backwoods, stupid, vicious, ignorant people. Think about Deliverance. I mean, who are the menacing forces that are harassing these middle class guys as they take their holiday going down the river? The sort of half toothless, half retarded, vicious hillbillies. Uh, and for many people, that's the understanding of the rural South, and in many cases of Southerners. In a situation that was quite close to my family, a person who had a fair deal of influence in my family endlessly portrayed Southerners as just ignorant hicks and stupid. And
What was the context of that in your family? How did
pardon?
that? You said it was in your family. How did that even
Yes.
come up?
Well, without going into too many details, when I took my sons when they were quite young to the deep South to meet people like Sam Dixon, the lawyer, and others, their eyes were they were amazed. These people were cultured, educated, and were an endless source of interesting historical stories. When he and one of his friends took us to Stone Mountain, and they were so impressed and they were so impressed at the restaurants. And the Southerners were very classy people, and what they had seen humorously, I suppose, in sitcoms like the Beverly Hillbillies, or more seriously in movies like Deliverance, uh, but was totally false. Once you actually got to meet Southerners, wow, they're interesting people. They're nice people. Uh, but I wonder how many people have actually had the opportunity um, to experience in real life or to test out in real life what they've seen in movies. I mean, you've been to Mexico quite a bit. You probably have a different understanding of Mexican people than what you might have gotten from certain Hollywood movies.
Well, I mean, Mexico is a totally separate problem,
Yeah.
uh, because even movies, they don't. I've never seen. I don't think any American movies that have reflected the kind of Mexico, the part of Mexico I know, which is basically high class white Creole aristocrats who are basically European in culture. I mean, that's an aspect of Mexico that, as far as the American political agenda goes, most Mexican American activists would say that's the shameful part of Mexico, and they don't even want white people to know that there is actually a very substantial white culture in Mexico where, well, I mean, it's got a very similar history to Louisiana, as a matter of fact, and a very similar history to at least the Mexican period of California history. Uh, there were there was a European culture in Mexico, and up to a point, it still survives. It's been subject to miscegenation, and you know, miscegenation was acceptable, much socially acceptable, much sooner in Mexico than it was here. And
You know,
so,
I know a couple of Canadian expats in Mexico, and they're saying exactly what you're saying. One I know has completely given up on Canada, and he will tell you very bluntly that feminism has destroyed Canada. Canadian women are just miserable witches with a B, and so now I feel he exaggerates, or I mean, he's had some bad experiences, and I don't think it's a fair generalization, but there's a grain of truth there. And he says where he is in Guadalajara, the people he associates with are very European, um, cultured, nice people. He can't speak highly enough about it, and I guess we're a family show, so I'll leave it with the fact that he says if you're a woman and you're 30, you're no longer all that desirable. He is 60 something, and he has a bevy of 25-year-olds. I hope I've sanitized that enough. But
I think that's it's a hilarious image, but okay.
but he said the people he sent me pictures of getting together with his friends in restaurants, and it could be a place in southern Italy. The image of well, the the Cheech and Chong, the drug dealing bandito, or even if it's humorous, um, uh, just it may be an aspect, not to deny that, but there is a different Mexico that most of us don't know much about.
Well, I mean, it's very complex because I mean, I have to say that the average Mexican that you meet in Los Angeles, uh, you compare it to the average Mexican that you meet even in Guadalajara or Mexico City, and they are different races, literally. The it's like, I mean, It's kind of like the Mario. I don't know if you remember the Mario boat lift from Cuba.
Yes, yes.
Basically, Fidel Castro was sending all his least desirables
That's being kind. Yes.
to Florida. Exactly. No, I mean, but I mean, that's kind of what Mexico has done with the United States. We are up to a point Mexico's penal colony because Mexico can't afford to deal with its surplus population or the misbehavior of its surplus population. And so it sends its surplus population to the United States. And that's a very cynical policy on the part of the Mexican elite.
I've heard of that. That's part of the idea behind La Reconquista. Get rid of our, well, perhaps not nice to say garbage, but get rid of the less desirable elements, ship them north. If they breed enough, there will be a demographic takeover of parts of the American Southwest, and there we accomplished the Reconquista, accomplished two good things: get rid of the surplus and repopulate the United States, while the dumb gringo doesn't know what's happening to him. And of course, led in many cases by traitors who are not even able to discuss this for fear of being called a racist.
Listen, you say that it's so bad form to talk about people as trash, but think about Emma Lazarus, the words that are inscribed on the Statue of Liberty. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore.
And you're going to make a country out of that? Yeah, our ancestors of ancient Greeks and Rome would never fall for such nonsense. I mean that is, and it's unfairly attached to the Statue of Liberty. That's not what France gave to the United States. They gave them the statue. That bizarre inscription by this subversive Jewish poetess, it was an add-on.
Oh, exactly.
I mean,
She was what is it called? That was the prototype of the Kalergi plan, whatever it's called, the Cohen.
absolutely. I've written a booklet on the Kalergi plan, and that's exactly. Only the Kalergi plan was sold really in many ways under false pretenses, but it is often when you actually look at those words and let them sink in, it ought to tell any wise man or woman this is not a prescription for something good. Donald Trump, I think, nailed it in picturesque terms. What did he call them? They're coming from these what?
Asshole countries.
Yeah, that shithole country. Okay, but he's right, and you're going to build something out of that. There's an act of faith, if there ever was one.
Well, I mean, it kind of worked in Australia, right? And it kind of worked in Georgia. That penal colonies can become something worthwhile. I mean, I'm not sure about Australia. I thought that Australia was a bastion of liberty, but it seems to have reverted to the world's largest open air prison right now.
Yeah, that has profoundly upset me. I've been to Australia, and the image of the average Australian, as far as I can tell, that you might have from
The
a
movie.
few cats. What's wrong? They kind of rough and ready, don't stand on circumstances, not overly impressed by their betters. What you'd expect from a population that, at one point, many of whom had been convicts. But the way that, and it's still relatively Anglo-Saxon, and the way that country has completely collapsed to medico-Stalinist tyranny. It's a police state. And they just, as the French, there's a great word in French, emmerdé, which means cover yourself with doo-doo, or disgrace yourself. Well, Australia absolutely disgraced itself with its treatment of the Serbian, tennis superstar Djokovic this past week.
Was he deported? I didn't hear the end of that story.
Oh well, yeah, he got deported. He appealed his first deportation order to court, and he was deported. So the guy has been tested negative, so he doesn't have COVID. Why would he not be allowed to compete? Well, they've got a rule. They've got a rule, and so they have one of the Grand Slams of tennis, and it's a contest where you don't have your major competitor allowed in, or I mean the one who's the top.
That reminds me, I wanted to ask you about when you first started talking about the COVID protests. Was anybody mentioning at the protest you attended today the fact that England, the birthplace of Big Brother, has completely retreated from masks and vaccine mandates?
Yes, in fact, the leader of the People's Party, Maxime Bernier, mentioned that, and people, of course, were applauded. Yes, even England has backed off from that. Just while we're on England, there's been a big scandal this past week that it's come to light that there were a number of parties in March of 2020, even one at 10 Downing Street, where first of all, you're not supposed to have gatherings, and then people weren't wearing masks and they were socializing and drinking and so on.
Even on May 10th, when the Duke of Edinburgh died.
Oh yeah, that's even more recently. Well, the scandal, the way it's expressed, is that, well, how could they be so hypocritical? And Johnson just make a fool of himself. He said, well, he didn't really know what the regulations were. Well, it's his government. But that to me is not the major takeaway. The takeaway is this. Most of these politicos, the political leaders, the people that were there, the staffers, they're characterized by not being big risk takers. Politicians are, for the most part, not brave. They want to cover their rear ends. They want to get reelected. They're not going to take a big chance. And similarly, most don't have a pretty advanced sense of keeping their hides intact. Now, what that tells me is they knew this COVID scare was largely yak doo-doo. It was a control mechanism that they weren't in dire danger of croaking themselves by socializing. They knew it. It's just the masses that they wanted to manipulate and scare.
And that is really a big scandal. Because that means that everybody was in on it. And there was, it wasn't like the top was as deluded as anybody else. I mean, but we've seen suggestions of that all along. The governor of California, the mayor of San Francisco, biggest lockdowns in the country have been in California, and the Pelosi and Gavin Newsom were out there at nice restaurants, just completely disregarding everything. And I think it was a meeting of, I don't know if they call it the G7 or the G8 these days, but yes, they were all photographed in a moment of lack of caution, without masks and not socially distancing. And so there have been all these hints. And I mean, do you think that's the only reason that Boris Johnson has has backed down is because he was basically caught with his pants down?
That's an interesting question. I don't know if that's the the basic reason. It may also be a sense that people have had it with the on again off again restrictions, that the people are burned out. I'm not sure, but yes, it may be a way um, of making that yesterday's news. Well, don't worry so much about what they did during the first lockdown, because we don't have lockdowns anymore. That's all ancient history. Life goes on. That may be part of it. I'm going to have to go, but
You look tired. You look tired. I was looking at you. You look like you've had a long day protesting.
hey, but it's healthy walking around, and even made even more healthy by having to walk through foot deep snow. So lots of exercise.
Well, excellent. Well, I don't know what happened to Bill. I don't know what happened to anybody else. But I definitely want to continue this
Yes.
discussion, because I think that unraveling the media and the message really is the key to taking charge of it. So
Yeah.
get some rest. Hope you
I,
recover
I,
from protesting.
I'll see if I can see cat people with Natasha Kinky. I mean Kinsky. Again, I
Yeah,
probably did.
all the yeah, cat people, taxi driver, Last Temptation of the Christ. I mean, Schrader's filmography is really amazing, because it's been like a lot of bread and butter, major not prize winning, but major Hollywood pictures for the past 50 years, and he's in town making another film right now.
That's
So
great. And he's 77 years old, right?
75, something like that, born in 46, I believe. So he'll probably turn 76 this year. Anyhow, and the other thing interesting about him, of course, is he is not Jewish. He is Dutch Calvinist Reformed from Grand Rapids, Michigan, and it's another interesting thing about him that we'll have to follow up on. But the person who promoted him, and this is interesting too, of course, was Pauline Kael of the New Yorker, who is indeed a member of the tribe, and
Yes.
one of the great promoters of what one might call Jewish agenda films in her.
Wow.
So there's a lot interesting that's going on here. But
Well,
anyhow,
we'll get back to that later.
and what can I say? Happy January 23rd.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for it.
Thank you for joining me. And I guess that's it for the evening. I really don't know why I send all these invitations out, and everyone seems to ignore them. Anyhow, but Paul has become a staple here, and he's a very fine staple. So I hope somebody's still watching this, despite the fact that I'm on Facebook suspension. Talk to you later. And again, happy January 23rd. January 23rd is my son's half birthday. His actual birthday is August 23rd, but when he was a little boy, my ex-wife and I, we used to celebrate the 23rd of every month. So Charlie, Lincoln, wherever you are.